From a pitbull being hurled at Keanu Reeves to Patrick Swayze secretly skydiving behind producers' backs, the making of Point Break was as wild as the adrenaline-fueled heists it depicted. This 1991 cult classic hides some truly bizarre production secrets, including a movie originally about skateboarding, real surfers who couldn't act their way out of a wetsuit, and continuity errors so obvious they're visible from space. The testosterone-charged bromance between an FBI agent and bank robber spawned unexpected real-life copycats and left one Red Hot Chili Peppers frontman knocked unconscious in a single punch. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Point Break 1991. Fact 1. Originally about skateboarding, not surfing. What if Point Break had been about radical skateboarders pulling off bank heists instead of Zen surfers chasing the perfect wave? That was actually the original concept when screenwriter W. Peter Iliff first put pen to paper in the late 1980s. The script that would eventually become one of the most iconic surf movies of all time started out in a completely different world, focused on the underground skateboarding scene that was exploding across California. The transformation from wheels to waves happened thanks to a chance encounter that co-producer Rick King had while trying to learn something new. King decided to take surf lessons in Malibu, probably thinking it would be a fun way to spend an afternoon. But during a break from struggling with his board, he picked up a copy of LA Weekly and stumbled across an article about Los Angeles being the bank robbery capital of America. As he sat there on the beach, still dripping wet, and probably feeling pretty frustrated with his surfing progress, something clicked in his mind. King started connecting the dots between the laid-back surf culture around him and the high-stakes world of bank robbery that he had just read about. The idea was so simple, it was genius. What if these chill surfers who seemed to live outside the normal rules of society were actually funding their endless summer lifestyle by pulling off perfectly executed heists? The contrast between the peaceful, almost spiritual world of surfing and the adrenaline-pumping violence of bank robbery created an irresistible dramatic tension. This light bulb moment completely changed the direction of the project. Iliff's skateboarding script got a major overhaul, trading concrete bowls and half-pipes for massive waves and pristine beaches. The core concept of extreme athletes living on the edge remained the same, but now they would be chasing swells instead of grinding rails. Rick King's surf lesson had accidentally created the foundation for what would become a cult classic that perfectly captured the intersection of crime, spirituality, and the search for the ultimate rush. Fact 2. The pogo cam, foot chase innovation. The heart-pounding foot chase between Johnny Utah and Bodie through the neighborhoods of Los Angeles wasn't just thrilling to watch, it was also a groundbreaking technical achievement that required inventing an entirely new piece of camera equipment. Director Kathryn Bigelow wanted to create something that had never been seen before in action movies, a chase sequence that would make audiences feel like they were right there running alongside the characters as they vaulted over fences, crashed through backyards, and dodged obstacles. The solution came in the form of what the crew nicknamed the pogo cam, a bizarre contraption that looked exactly like what its name suggests. The device consisted of a 35mm camera mounted on top of a body-length pole, with a gyro stabilizer borrowed from a Steadicam system attached to the bottom to keep the shot smooth despite all the running and jumping. Camera operator James Muro had the incredibly demanding job of carrying this unwieldy device while sprinting behind and in front of Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze's stunt double, pointing the camera at them with as much accuracy as he could manage while running at full speed. The physical demands on Muro were intense, as he had to keep up with professional stunt performers while operating heavy camera equipment and trying to frame shots that would look good on screen. He essentially became a third participant in the chase, weaving in and out of the action and changing positions constantly to capture different angles. Bigelow later explained that what excited her most about this technique was how absolutely alive it made every single frame of the sequence. The innovation paid off in a big way, creating a chase scene that felt more immediate and visceral than anything audiences had experienced before. John C. McGinley, who played Agent Harp in the film, praised Bigelow's approach, saying she made the foot chase infinitely more interesting and managed to make it as exciting as any car chase. The pogo cam technique became a template that influenced action filmmaking for years to come, proving that sometimes the most effective innovations come from combining existing technology in completely new and unexpected ways. Fact 3. Patrick Swayze's secret skydiving rebellion. Patrick Swayze was already an accomplished skydiver when he signed on to Point Break, but the studio's insurance company had very different ideas about how much jumping their leading man should be doing during production. The insurance restrictions were crystal clear. Swayze was officially banned from making any unauthorized skydiving jumps while filming was underway, since an injury could shut down the entire production and cost millions of dollars. The producers thought they had solved the problem by making Swayze a deal that seemed reasonable to everyone involved. They told him he couldn't do any unscheduled dives during filming, but in exchange, they promised to let him do one real skydiving sequence on camera later in the movie. This compromise was supposed to satisfy Swayze's need for authentic action, while keeping the insurance company happy and protecting the production schedule. But Swayze had other plans entirely. And he wasn't about to let a little thing like insurance restrictions keep him away from something he was passionate about. Whenever he wasn't needed on set for the day, Swayze would quietly slip away to local airports and go skydiving anyway, completely ignoring the studio's ban. The producers had no idea that their star was regularly jumping out of planes behind their backs, putting both himself and the entire production at risk. Swayze's love for skydiving was so infectious that he managed to convince his co-star Gary Busey to give it a try as well. According to Busey, Swayze was so enthusiastic about the sport that he kept pestering him to join him for a jump, and eventually Busey agreed to go skydiving with Swayze after filming had wrapped up. The experience apparently made quite an impression on Busey, who later talked about how Swayze's passion for the sport was impossible to resist. The irony wasn't lost on Swayze himself, who later pointed out that the insurance company was worried about him getting hurt jumping out of planes, but they never said a word about him getting his brains pounded in by some of the biggest surf on the planet while filming the movie's intense surfing sequences. Fact 4. The real pitbull versus fake dog stunt. One of the most shocking moments in Point Break happens when Bodhi throws a pitbull at Johnny Utah during a tense confrontation, and Utah has to kick the dog away to defend himself. What looks like a single continuous action sequence on screen actually required one of the most complex and carefully choreographed animal stunts in the entire movie, involving two completely different dogs, and an incredible amount of planning to make sure no animals were harmed during filming. The production team knew they were dealing with something that could easily go wrong and potentially hurt both the human actors and the animal, so they approached the scene with extreme caution and rigorous preparation. For the first part of the sequence where Bodhi actually throws the dog toward Utah, they used a real, well-trained pit bull that had been extensively prepared for the action by professional animal handlers. The ground underneath where the dog would land was carefully padded with soft materials to make any impact as gentle as possible and reduce the risk of injury to practically zero. The actual throwing was nothing like what appears in the final movie, since the real dog was only gently tossed by its trainer from just over 1 foot away from Keanu Reeves. The camera angles and editing made this very short, very safe movement look much more dramatic and dangerous than it actually was. The dog and Reeves had rehearsed the interaction multiple times beforehand, so both the actor and the animal knew exactly what to expect when the cameras started rolling. For the second part of the sequence where Utah kicks the dog away, the filmmakers switched to a completely different approach and used a fake dog instead of the real animal. This transition happens so quickly and the editing is so seamless that most viewers never notice they're actually watching two different parts of the scene that were filmed separately using two different dogs. The fake dog allowed Reeves to perform the kicking motion without any risk of accidentally hurting a real animal, while the careful editing made the whole sequence look like one continuous, dangerous encounter. Fact 5. 3 different movie titles during production. The movie we know as Point Break went through a confusing identity crisis during production, changing its title not once but twice before the filmmakers finally settled on the name that would become iconic. This wasn't just a simple case of tweaking the marketing either, since the title changes happened so late in the process that they were actually filming scenes while still trying to figure out what to call the finished product. When Keanu Reeves was first cast in the lead role, the project was called Johnny Utah, which made perfect sense since that was the name of his character, an FBI agent going undercover to catch a gang of bank robbers. The studio initially thought this straightforward approach would work well, focusing attention on the main character and Reeves' star power. But as the project developed and Patrick Swayze joined the cast, executives started having second thoughts about whether the title really captured what the movie was actually about. The problem was that Johnny Utah didn't say anything about surfing, which had become the central element of the story after the script was changed from its original skateboarding concept. So the studio decided to rename the film Riders on the Storm, borrowing the title from the famous song by The Doors. On the surface, this seemed like a much better fit since the song had a moody, atmospheric quality that matched the movie's blend of crime and California beach culture. But the more the filmmakers thought about it, the more they realized that Jim Morrison's lyrics in Riders on the Storm had absolutely nothing to do with what was happening in their movie. The song was about completely different themes, and using its title would probably confuse audiences who knew the track well. So they scrapped that idea too and went back to the drawing board. It wasn't until they were already halfway through filming that someone finally suggested Point Break, and everyone immediately knew they had found the right answer. The title perfectly captured the surfing terminology that was so important to the story, since a point break is the specific type of wave formation where water hits a piece of land jutting out from the coastline. Fact 6. Anthony Kiedis got knocked out immediately. Red Hot Chili Peppers frontman Anthony Kiedis had a small but memorable role in Point Break as a character named Tone, one of the aggressive local surfers who gets into a fight with Johnny Utah at Leo Carrillo State Beach. What was supposed to be an extended fight sequence showcasing multiple characters ended up becoming one of the shortest combat scenes in the entire movie, all because Kiedis had other priorities that conflicted with the demanding schedule of movie production. Director Catherine Bigelow was known for being extremely thorough when it came to fight choreography, making sure that every punch, kick, and grapple looked realistic and dramatic on camera. She typically required all the actors involved in fight scenes to attend multiple rehearsal sessions where they would practice the choreography over and over until every movement became second nature. This preparation was essential for creating convincing action sequences while keeping everyone safe during filming. The problem was that Kiedis, who was the lead singer of one of the most popular rock bands in the world at the time, reportedly didn't make it to the fight choreography rehearsals that were scheduled for his character's big scene. This left Bigelow and the stunt coordinators in a difficult position, since they had planned a complex fight sequence involving multiple participants, but one of the key actors hadn't learned any of the moves. Rather than delay filming or try to teach Kiedis the choreography on the spot, the production team came up with a creative solution that actually made the scene more memorable than it might have been otherwise. They decided to rewrite Tone's part in the fight so that he would be knocked unconscious with a single punch right at the beginning of the brawl, eliminating the need for any complex choreography involving Kiedis. This last-minute script change meant that Kiedis essentially became the first casualty of the beach fight, getting dropped immediately and spending the rest of the scene lying motionless in the sand. The quick knockout actually worked perfectly for the story, showing how tough Johnny Utah could be when he needed to defend himself, while also allowing the fight to continue with the other actors who had properly rehearsed their parts. Fact 7. Swayze's Adios Amigo was real skydiving. One of the most dramatic moments in Point Break happens near the end of the movie, when Bodhi jumps out of an airplane over Mexico, delivering his famous line, "Adios amigo," before disappearing into the sky. What makes this scene truly remarkable is that audiences are watching Patrick Swayze actually perform a real skydive in a single uninterrupted shot with no cuts, camera tricks, or stunt doubles involved. This authentic skydiving sequence was the result of a carefully negotiated compromise between Swayze and the nervous studio executives who were worried about their star getting injured during production. The insurance company had made it crystal clear that Swayze was not allowed to do any unauthorized skydiving while filming was taking place, but they knew how passionate he was about the sport, and how important it was to him that his character's actions looked genuine on screen. The deal they worked out was simple but effective. Swayze would agree to follow all the insurance restrictions and avoid any unofficial jumps during filming, and in return, the producers would give him one opportunity to perform a real skydive on camera for the movie. This single jump would be the only officially sanctioned skydiving that Swayze would be allowed to do as part of the production, making it an incredibly valuable and meaningful moment for everyone involved. When the time came to film the scene, the camera captured everything in real time as Swayze delivered his iconic farewell line and then actually jumped out of the airplane. The shot continues to follow him as he falls through the sky, creating an incredibly powerful and authentic moment that would have been impossible to achieve using special effects or stunt work. The uncut nature of the footage means that viewers are experiencing exactly what happened in that moment, with no editing tricks or movie magic to create the illusion. Swayze later talked about how he had to battle the insurance companies to get permission for this one jump, pointing out the irony that they were worried about him skydiving, but had no concerns about him getting beaten up by massive ocean waves during the surfing sequences. Fact 8. Night surfing shot during daytime. The atmospheric night surfing scenes in Point Break create some of the movie's most memorable and moody moments. But sharp-eyed viewers who pay close attention to the underwater shots might notice something that completely gives away the filmmaker's secret. Despite being presented as nighttime sequences, these scenes were actually filmed during broad daylight, using special camera filters to create the illusion of darkness. The decision to film the night surfing during the day was a practical one that came down to the basic challenges of ocean cinematography in 1991. Shooting actual surfing sequences in the dark would have been extremely difficult and dangerous for both the actors and the camera crew, since the ocean is unpredictable enough during daylight hours when everyone can see what's happening around them. The filmmakers needed to capture dynamic surfing action that looked authentic and exciting, which would have been nearly impossible to achieve safely in genuine nighttime conditions. To create the nighttime effect, the cinematography team used darkening filters and special lighting techniques that could make bright daytime footage look like it was filmed after sunset. This approach worked well for most of the shots, especially the ones taken from above the water's surface where the lighting could be more easily controlled and the horizon line wasn't visible to give away the time of day. However, the underwater shots tell a completely different story and reveal the truth about when these scenes were actually filmed. In several of these submerged shots, viewers can clearly see bright sunlight streaming down through the water, and in some cases, you can even spot patches of blue sky and clouds visible from beneath the surface. The underwater environment made it impossible to hide the natural daylight with filters, since water naturally amplifies and reveals the true lighting conditions above. The contrast between the artificially darkened surface shots and the obviously daytime underwater footage creates a continuity error that becomes more noticeable once you know what to look for. Later in the same sequence, when Keanu Reeves and Lori Petty are shown sitting in the water having a conversation, the lighting suddenly changes to match actual nighttime conditions, making it clear that these dialogue scenes were filmed separately under real nighttime lighting. Fact 9. Screenwriter paid only $6,000. The original screenplay for Point Break was written by Peter Iliff, a struggling writer who received the incredibly modest sum of just $6,000 for creating what would eventually become one of the most beloved action movies of the 1990s. This tiny paycheck becomes even more shocking when you consider that the finished film went on to make over $83 million at the box office worldwide, and became a cultural phenomenon that's still quoted, referenced today. Iliff was living the classic starving artist lifestyle while working on the Point Break script, spending his days writing and his nights waiting tables to pay the bills. He had previously written the screenplay for a science fiction skateboarding movie called Prayer of the Roller Boys, but he was still far from being an established Hollywood screenwriter who could command big paychecks for his work. The $6,000 payment for Point Break was probably a significant amount of money for him at the time, but it was practically nothing compared to what the movie would eventually earn. The financial situation becomes even more complicated when you consider how much the original script was changed during the development process. Director Catherine Bigelow and executive producer James Cameron, who were married at the time, ended up doing extensive rewrites to Ilif's screenplay to make the plot flow better and create the version that audiences eventually saw in theaters. These changes were so substantial that they basically transformed the entire project, yet Ilif retained sole writing credit on the finished film. Cameron and Bigelow's contributions were significant enough that they could have easily demanded shared writing credits, which would have given them a portion of the ongoing royalties and recognition for the script. However, neither of them chose to take official writing credits, which meant that Ilif continued to be listed as the sole screenwriter, even though much of what appeared on screen came from their revisions and rewrites. The irony is that Ilif's original $6,000 payday was just the beginning, since he would have continued to earn royalties from the film's success in theaters, home video, television broadcasts, and streaming platforms for years to come, turning that small initial payment into a much larger long-term income stream. Fact 10. Real FBI agents versus movie mistakes. Keanu Reeves took his preparation for playing FBI agent Johnny Utah very seriously, spending time with real federal agents in Los Angeles to study their behavior, training at the LAPD firing range to improve his shooting skills, and even working with UCLA quarterback coaches to nail his character's football background. Despite all this authentic preparation, the movie's plot contains some glaring inconsistencies about how the FBI actually operates that any real agent would have immediately spotted. The most obvious problem with Utah's career trajectory is that he somehow manages to remain an active FBI agent despite committing what would be career-ending violations in the real world. During the course of the movie, Utah gets himself arrested at a bank during a robbery, which would immediately raise serious questions about his judgment and competence. He also makes several critical errors that directly lead to the death of his partner Angelo Pappas, including allowing his personal feelings for Bodhi to interfere with his professional duties. In addition to these major incidents, Utah repeatedly violates basic FBI protocols throughout the investigation. He goes off on unauthorized solo missions, fails to call for backup when he should, and gets emotionally involved with both suspects and witnesses in ways that would never be tolerated by a real federal law enforcement agency. Any one of these violations would likely result in suspension, disciplinary action, or termination in the real FBI. Yet somehow, Utah not only keeps his job, but appears to be in good standing with the Bureau at the end of the movie when he tracks Bodhi down in Australia. The film treats this final confrontation as if Utah is still acting in his official capacity as an FBI agent, rather than as someone who should have been fired months earlier for his repeated failures and protocol violations. The irony is that Reeves put so much effort into making his portrayal of an FBI agent look authentic on screen, working with real federal agents to get the details right, but the script completely ignores how the FBI would actually handle an agent who performed as poorly as Utah does throughout the investigation. In reality, Utah would have been pulled off the case and possibly dismissed from the Bureau long before he ever made it to that final beach confrontation with Bodhi. Fact 11. The magical reappearing surfboard. One of the most noticeable continuity errors in Point Break involves Johnny Utah's distinctive surfboard, which Bodhi playfully describes as looking like a '57 Chevy when Utah first shows up at the beach. This board becomes the center of a glaring mistake that somehow made it all the way through filming, editing, and post-production without anyone catching the error or fixing it in time for the theatrical release. The problem starts during the intense fight scene at Latigo Beach between Johnny Utah and the local surfers led by Warchild. During this brutal confrontation, Utah's beloved surfboard gets broken clean in half, snapping into two distinct pieces that are clearly visible on screen. After the fight ends, Utah is shown walking away from the beach without his board, leaving the broken pieces behind in the sand, since there's obviously no point in trying to carry a surfboard that's been destroyed. The continuity error becomes obvious in a later scene when Tyler wakes up Johnny early in the morning because there are perfect waves, and they need to get to the beach immediately. As they're getting ready to go surfing, Johnny is clearly shown carrying what appears to be the exact same surfboard that was broken during the fight, completely intact and in perfect condition, as if nothing had ever happened to it. This magical reappearing surfboard creates a jarring inconsistency that breaks the flow of the story for viewers who were paying attention to the earlier scenes. The board is so distinctive, with its specific shape and design that Bodhi compared to a classic car, that there's no mistaking it for a different surfboard that Johnny might have acquired between scenes. The error is particularly surprising because continuity mistakes like this are usually caught during the editing process, when editors are reviewing footage and making sure that props, costumes, and other visual elements remain consistent from scene to scene. The fact that such an obvious mistake made it into the final cut suggests that either the editing team missed it entirely, or they noticed it but decided it wasn't worth the time and expense to fix with additional filming or digital effects. Fact 12. Gary Busey's improvised iconic line. One of the most memorable and frequently quoted lines in Point Break came straight from Gary Busey's own mouth without any planning from the screenwriters or direction from Catherine Bigelow. The famous "Utah, get me too" moment that Busey delivers as his character Angelo Pappas was completely improvised during filming, and perfectly captured his character's eccentric personality in just 4 simple words. The scene takes place when Pappas and Utah are staking out a potential bank robbery location, and Pappas is getting hungry while they wait for something to happen. In the original script, there was probably some basic dialogue about food or getting something to eat, but Busey decided to take the scene in his own direction and make it more specific and memorable than what was written on the page. Busey's delivery of the line is classic Gary Busey, combining his character's gruff, no-nonsense attitude with a touch of impatience and hunger that makes Pappas feel like a real person rather than just a plot device. The way he says Utah first, using his partner's last name in that authoritative but friendly way that cops do, immediately establishes their working relationship and shows how Pappas sees himself as the senior partner who can give orders to the rookie. The "get me too" part of the line works on multiple levels, showing both Pappas's appetite and his assumption that Utah will take care of the details without needing further explanation. It's the kind of shorthand communication that develops between partners who have been working together and know each other's habits, even though Utah and Pappas haven't actually been partners for very long in the story. What makes this improvisation so successful is how perfectly it fits with Busey's established screen persona and his character's role in the movie. The line became so popular with audiences that it's still quoted by Point Break fans more than 30 years after the movie was released. The fact that such a memorable moment came from Busey's own creativity rather than the script shows how much actors can contribute to a film when they're given the freedom to interpret their characters and add their own touches to the dialogue. Fact 13. Real bank robbers copied the movie. Point Break's influence extended far beyond movie theaters and into the real world in ways that the filmmakers never intended or expected. After the movie was released in July of 1991, law enforcement agencies across the country began reporting actual bank robberies committed by criminals who were directly copying the methods and disguises used by the fictional ex-president's gang in the film. The most obvious similarity was the use of rubber masks depicting former United States presidents, which became the signature calling card of both the movie's fictional robbers and their real-life imitators. In Point Break, the gang wore masks of Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter, and Lyndon Johnson during their heists, creating an iconic and memorable visual that made the robberies feel both theatrical and political, at the same time. Real criminals apparently found this approach appealing for several practical reasons beyond just copying something they saw in a movie. The president masks were easily available at costume shops and party stores, making them simple to acquire without drawing attention. They also completely concealed the robbers' faces and identities, which is obviously crucial for anyone trying to avoid getting caught by security cameras or identified by witnesses. The masks also had a psychological effect that the real robbers may have borrowed from the movie's approach to bank robbery. In Point Break, the ex-presidents use fear and intimidation as their primary tools, moving quickly through banks while wearing these instantly recognizable but also somewhat absurd disguises that both frightened and confused their victims. The combination of the familiar presidential faces with the threatening behavior created a surreal atmosphere that made it harder for people to react normally. Law enforcement officials noted that some of the copycat robberies also followed other elements of the Point Break formula, including the gang's preference for quick in-and-out jobs that focused on cash from teller drawers rather than attempting to break into bank vaults. The movie had essentially provided a detailed blueprint for bank robbery techniques, complete with timing strategies and escape methods that some real criminals apparently decided to put into practice in the months and years following the film's release. Fact 14. The Bells Beach, ending filmed in Oregon. The climactic final confrontation between Johnny Utah and Bodhi takes place at what the movie tells us is Bells Beach in Victoria, Australia, one of the most famous and challenging surf breaks in the world. However, audiences who have actually visited the real Bells Beach would immediately notice that the coastline shown in Point Break looks nothing like the actual Australian location, and there's a very good reason for that discrepancy. The entire ending sequence was actually filmed at Indian Beach, which is located in Ecola State Park near Cannon Beach on the Oregon coast, thousands of miles away from the supposed Australian setting. This location switch happened during post-production, when the filmmakers realized they needed additional footage to complete the movie's ending, but traveling all the way to Australia for a few more scenes would have been extremely expensive and logistically complicated. The Oregon location provided the dramatic rocky coastline and powerful waves that the filmmakers needed for the final confrontation, even if it didn't match the geography of the real Bells Beach. Indian Beach offered the kind of rugged, isolated setting that worked perfectly for the story's conclusion, where Utah finally tracks down Bodhi and has to decide whether to arrest him or let him ride his final wave during the legendary 50-year storm. The location deception becomes even more interesting when you consider that the massive waves that Bodhi rides at the end of the movie weren't filmed at Indian Beach either. Those spectacular big wave surfing shots were actually captured at Waimea Bay, on the north shore of Oahu in Hawaii, featuring professional surfer Derek Dorner as Patrick Swayze's stunt double. The final sequence, therefore, combines footage from at least 2 different locations to create the illusion of a single Australian beach. The filmmakers also had to deal with some obvious continuity issues related to the actors' appearances during these reshoots. Keanu Reeves had grown his hair out significantly for his role in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, which was filming around the same time, while Patrick Swayze had cut his hair short for his next project, City of Joy. These hair changes actually worked for the story, since the ending takes place several months after the main events of the movie. Fact 15. Patrick's Roadhouse restaurant reference. Hidden in one of Point Break's routine surveillance scenes is a clever inside joke that most viewers probably missed on their first viewing, but becomes obvious once you know what to look for. During a scene where Johnny Utah is reporting to his supervisor Angelo about Bodhi's daily activities and movements, Utah casually mentions that Bodhi goes to eat lunch at a place called Patrick's Roadhouse, which sounds like just another random restaurant detail that helps establish the character's habits and routines. What makes this seemingly throwaway line so interesting is that Patrick's Roadhouse is actually a real restaurant that exists on the Pacific Coast Highway just outside of Los Angeles, making it a logical place for a Southern California surfer like Bodhi to grab a meal. The restaurant has been a popular hangout spot for locals and travelers along the coast for decades, known for its casual atmosphere and location right on one of California's most scenic driving routes. However, the real reason this restaurant name made it into the script has nothing to do with its actual location or reputation, and everything to do with Patrick Swayze's previous film career. Just 2 years before Point Break was released, Swayze had starred in a movie called Roadhouse, where he played a tough bouncer who cleans up a rowdy bar in a small Missouri town. That film became a cult classic in its own right, known for its over-the-top action sequences and Swayze's intense performance as a philosophical fighter who could quote ancient Chinese philosophy while throwing troublemakers out of bars. The inclusion of Patrick's Roadhouse in the Point Break dialogue was clearly a deliberate reference to Swayze's earlier film, creating a subtle connection between the two movies that fans of both films could appreciate. It's the kind of inside joke that screenwriters and directors sometimes slip into their scripts as a way of acknowledging an actor's previous work or creating Easter eggs for observant viewers. The reference works on multiple levels because it's both a real place that makes sense within the story's Los Angeles setting and a playful nod to Swayze's filmography that doesn't distract from the main plot. Most viewers would simply accept it as realistic dialogue about where Bodhi likes to eat, while Swayze fans might catch the reference and smile at the clever connection.